In this Diablo 4 video, I'm going to be showing you my White Walker build, which is a Necromancer 70+ build that's aimed at World Tier 4 and uses minions and the Frost element in order to freeze enemies and deal increased damage. A lot of people have been asking me to make a late-game minion build that can keep minions alive where they can actually do something in combat, so my primary objective with this build was to incorporate minions in some way so that they could survive and contribute to combat, and so I feel like I've done a decent job at that. I will say, however, that minions do not deal a ton of damage in this game the way they are, even with, taking all of the minion nodes that increase damage. But they can contribute in other ways, such as providing corpses and also freezing enemies, making it easier for you to kill them, and also providing you with essence. So there is a reason to have them in this build. They also act as meat shields. And also, once we get the unique Ring of Mendel, they also deal a lot more damage when they explode on enemies, making them a lot more viable than before. So when I started focusing on this build, the first thing was, how do I get my minions to survive? It took me a while to figure out exactly what the threshold was for minion survival before I could dial it back a little bit and focus on damage. And I think I've got a good balance here, but you can tweak this around a little bit if you're having difficulty, depending on what equipment you have. So the first thing to know is that our second board, the one after our base board, I've taken the Cult Leader board. And this whole board is focused on minion damage, minion protection, skeletal mages and skeletal warriors, and increasing their damage and protection. And it's all about them. It does not boost your damage in any way. It solely focuses on them. There are a couple really good rare nodes and magic nodes in this tree. First of is Custody, which reduces the damage your minions take significantly. And once you meet the dexterity requirement for this, they're also going to take even further reduced damage. Custody also has a group of magic nodes around it that further reduce the damage your minions take. And the other one is Overlord, which increases the minion damage that you do, which is another rare node, and the magic nodes around that further boost the damage of your minions. And what's really great is there is a glyph socket positioned perfectly between these two clusters, and here I've placed the Deadrazor glyph. What Deadrazor glyph does by default is it makes it so Paragon nodes within range gain +% bonus to their minion damage and minion damage reduction modifiers. So Custody and Overlord are going to get affected, as well as the magic nodes within range around them. And once you upgrade this to level 15, it's going to expand to incorporate all of their magic nodes, further increasing the damage reduction you gain to your minions and increasing the damage they gain. This is crucial to keeping your minions alive because it really reduces the damage that they take. Up until you have this node, you will probably have to use the legendary aspect of Hardened Bones, and maybe even up until you've expanded this to level 15 to give yourself enough damage reduction that your minions will stay alive. I was actually able to remove the aspect of Hardened Bones once I had this up to level 15, and I don't actually need it to keep my minions alive. There's a couple scenarios where it's dicey for them, but I find that if I just heal them regularly, they typically survive. However, if you find that you do need more protection for them, there is a rare node up in the upper left-hand corner of this tree called Armor Clad, which gives your minions even more armor and more maximum life. So besides those nodes and the Skeletal Mage cluster that's really focusing on the damage of the Skeletal Mage, I don't have anything that really helps keep your minions alive, except I have max minion life on a lot of my gear in order to give them a lot of health so that they don't die quickly. I do still have Bonded and Essence max, which makes it so that your Skeletal Priests heal for 60% more of your max minion life. And this is great when they have very high max health, because this is going to get them topped up. But you'll notice that I don't have Death's Defense anymore, and that's simply because minions usually don't take up to 30% of their health in one hit anymore. They rarely occur, so you don't actually need that. You can pull these points out and put them somewhere else. And I've actually opted to put them into Inspiring Leader, which makes it so that after you've been healthy for 4 seconds, your minions gain 12% attack speed. And attack speed is really good for your minions, because when your Cold Mages attack, they gave you Essence back, and they also help to chill and freeze enemies, so the faster they attack, the more often that's going to happen. And when your Reapers attack faster, they're going to get more opportunities to create corpses, which you can use with Corpse Explosion or to heal your minions. Besides that, minion-related things I have are Vicious Aspect, which increases the number of Skeletal Mages you have by 2, giving you 5 mages. And I also have Coldbringer's Aspect, which makes it so every 10 seconds your Cold Skeletal Mages cast Blizzard that deals cold damage and continuously chills enemies for 8% for 6 seconds. This is fantastic in order to set chilled on enemies and help freeze them as your mages attack into them, and as you attack into them as well. So this is just really good all around to help CC enemies, especially if you have damage against crowd control, which we do. And you definitely, if you're playing with Skeletal Mages, particularly Cold Mages, and you're able to keep them alive, you definitely want to have this aspect if possible. However, because I have this aspect, I don't have room for extra Skeletal Warriors, which you may want. So there's a trade-off here. You can have more Skeletal Warriors, but I simply find that Skeletal Mages are more beneficial to this build and that cold and freezing really helps to increase your crowd control damage because we use the control glyph, which increases your damage against crowd control enemies, but also increases your damage and your minions' damage against chilled and frozen enemies, which is fantastic for this build. I also have an aspect of reanimation, which increases your skeleton damage after they've been alive for 10 seconds up to 30%. This is a really good one for focusing on increasing damage. However, your minions don't deal a ton of damage, so you're better off with the aspect of the Frenzied Dead, which increases your minion attack speed for 3 seconds after they damage an enemy, stacking up to 3 times. Because again, this is going to freeze things faster. This is going to get you back essence faster from your mages. This is going to create more corpses from your reapers that you can then detonate with corpse explosion. So even though it's not increasing their damage, it's creating a situation that's better for you. However, I had a max roll on this one, so I just kept it. And lastly, for your minions, we're using Ring of Mendeln here, and this gives you lucky hit chance, minion attack speed, max minion life, thorns. These are all great for your build, except for thorns, we don't really need that. However, if you were playing like a thorns minion build with like razor plate, this would not be bad for that. But what this really does is it makes it so that while you have 7 or more minions, you gain lucky hit up to a 10% chance to empower all your minions, causing the next attack from each to explode for X amount of physical damage. This is fantastic because periodically your minions will then just hit for huge damage against mobs, which is really the weakness of minions. They don't deal a ton of damage natively, even when you crank their damage at every turn. So this is a way to kind of bypass that problem and really up their damage. And one thing that seems to happen with this ring, and it needs more testing on my end to figure out if this is actually really what's causing the damage, but when I use this with Army of the Dead, which is our ultimate ability, it seems to cause insane damage. Like, it'll wipe out packs of enemies in like a second. And I don't know if that's because they're detonating and also detonating for this, or what's happening exactly, because the lucky hit chance on that is very, very high, and then it makes all the other minions detonate. But it seems to make Army of the Dead absolutely deadly. So that's the minion part of the build. Now let's talk about how we get our damage. And obviously we're using 2 main skills here. We're using Bone Spear for our damage to help support at range. I was looking for a good skill to help support minions at range, and this seems to be a very, very good one at doing that. And then obviously Corpse Explosion to not only gain us essence, but to also help deal damage from range without spending essence. So if you're using Bone Spear, you of course want the Splintering aspect. This is Bone Spear's aspect, and it makes it so that enemies hit beyond the first vulnerable are also vulnerable for a certain amount of seconds, and that bone shards that splinter from Bone Spear deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies. And this absolutely just makes this skill wreck. You absolutely want this. I put this on my amulet here to get even more time and more damage out of this. It's really good. You don't have to have it on your amulet, but I recommend probably putting it there. And another really good aspect for this build is aspect of Grasping Veins. This is one that should probably be in just about every Necro build, and it makes it so that you have up to a 20% increased critical strike chance for 6 seconds after using Corpse Tendrils, and you gain up to 60% critical strike damage to enemies that are damaged by Corpse Tendrils. This one is also another good candidate for your amulet because this will give you 30% critical strike chance and 90% critical strike damage to enemies damaged by Corpse Tendrils. Corpse Tendrils is great, right? Like, you cast it on a corpse, it doesn't even consume it. Pulls enemies together, they're stunned, and then they're also set vulnerable if you use that upgrade of it. And that just increases your damage if you have damage against stunned or damage against vulnerable. Also removes those enemies from the fight and groups them up nicely for some nice bone spears and corpse explosions. Just really, really strong in this build. So for my helmet, I'm using the unique Deathless Visage. This gives you total armor, physical damage, critical strike damage with bone skills, maximum essence, but more importantly, it makes it so Bone Spear leaves an exploding trail behind it when you use it. This makes Bone Spear even more deadly. When you send it through a pack of enemies, the explosions trail behind it just helps to wipe everything out. This is really, really good. If you don't have this one, I recommend putting like max skeletons increase for your warriors to give you extra warriors as well. Or you could put like a damage shield aspect of the protector on here to give you more protection. For my gloves, I'm using the unique Frostburn here. This gives you critical strike chance, cold damage, freeze duration, gives you primary resources back on lucky hit. But more importantly, it makes it so that you have a lucky hit chance to freeze enemies for 2 seconds. And this follows the frost theme of this build, right? You have the blizzard from your skeletal mages, you have their cold attacks by nature that are freezing enemies, and now this is going to freeze enemies for you as well. So you're going to, freeze enemies a lot in this build, preventing them from dealing damage to you, preventing them from doing a lot of things, while also increasing your damage against crowd control because of the control glyph. On my legs, I have the aspect of Disobedience. This increases your armor by up to 50% if you have max roll for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage. And you're dealing constant damage with this build, so that armor is very, very valuable at keeping you alive. You could replace this with Aspect of Protector if you'd rather have a damage shield, but you want something protective here for you. And for our one-handed weapon, I'm using Black River here, and I really like one-handed weapon for this build for attack speed. That attack speed is really great. Your minion's attack speed is kind of based off your attack speed. But this gives you damage to distant enemies, intelligence, damage to healthy enemies, gives you rank to Fueled by Death, which gives you increased damage when you consume a corpse. But more importantly, it makes it so Corpse Explosion consumes up to 4 additional corpses, dealing increased damage and has an increased explosion radius. And if you're playing a Necromancer and you've been using Corpse Explosion at all, you know that late game Corpse Explosion starts to fall off. It simply doesn't do enough damage. You have to like explode lots and lots of corpses over and over, and that's why a lot of people move to the Shadow version of it in order to get more damage out of it, even though it's slower, but typically more damage. While we use the regular version of Corpse Explosion that doesn't have the damage over time for a good burst, because this weapon makes Corpse Explosion kind of meta again, and makes it really, really strong, and also ramps up your essence, because if you use it once and there are 5 corpses on the ground, you're going to get 30 essence back, which is fantastic, helping to top off your essence, making your Bone Spear even stronger. And the reason your Bone Spear is stronger when you have max essence is because of the Ossified Essence Key passive, which makes your bone skills deal 1% increased damage for each point of essence you have above 50 upon cast. So this means you want to have max essence increase, and you also want to try and cast when you're at max essence. And keeping yourself topped up in between casts is going to make it so that each Bone Spear deals as much damage as possible. And since you don't need to like fling Bone Spears at lightning rate with this build in order to deal damage, you're perfectly fine to throw one, then Corpse Explosion, then throw one, then Corpse Explosion, etc. And I do want to mention that there's a really good aspect, Requiem aspect, that fits well with this build. You'd have to sacrifice the aspect of Grasping Veins to use it here, which is tough to do. But it could give you, if you max roll it, 5 maximum essence per active minion. We have 9, that's 45 maximum essence, which is a huge amount. And that will further boost the damage of your Bone Spear by 45% if you cast at max essence. So that's not anything to sneeze at, and you might want to consider getting it, but only probably if you have a max roll or like 4 on it. I wasn't able to get one, so I didn't test it out, but that's another option there if you want it. So if you're talking about gloves and you don't have Frostburn yet, you're going to want something that gives you critical strike chance, and you're going to want something that gives you ranks 2 Bone Spear. Both of these are fantastic for this build, so look for gloves that ideally have both of those things on it. And if you're using a weapon and you don't have Black River yet, I suggest using any one-handed weapon that has critical damage on it, vulnerable damage on it, increase to your core skill damage on it, or just, frankly, damage to distance. Anything that's going to give you, like, 4 modifiers that increase your damage, or maybe, you know, max stats, like all stats, something like that, that'll give you damage on your Paragon or max to Intelligence. So if you're just looking over the Paragon board, you can see I went into Cult Leader, I got up to the middle there and took the Legendary aspect, I got Skeletal Mages nodes, and I actually sacrificed the Skeleton Warrior nodes on the left. I had them at one point, in order to get all the way over into the Bone Graft tree and pick up some of the passives there, like Essence on Kill, which is nice for keeping your Essence topped up. Picked up the Legendary aspect there, which further boosts increases your max Essence and increases your damage the more you use Bone skills. And we also got all the way over to get a 3rd socket so that we could pick up Control and get even more damage to these like frozen, chilled, and CC'd enemies. You'll notice, by the way, that there are a lot of like not picked up magic nodes on the way over there, because I really wanted to get over there and get that socket and get that glyph in there and get it filled out so I could get damage to crowd control, because there's a lot of crowd control damage in there, and it also boosts your minion damage as well. So I wanted to get there, and I will obviously come back through and pick up some of the magic nodes. And I also need a little bit more dexterity here to get some of the rare nodes in this tree, so I'll be focusing on picking up some dexterity. And, that's really kind of what my thought process was. Probably spend the next 20 or 30 Paragon points just fleshing out this tree with the things I missed, and then maybe picking up some more stuff in the Cult Leader tree if I, need more minion survivability, or I want to get more Skeleton Warrior damage, etc. So that wraps up our White Walker build. I hope you guys enjoy this build. This is a ton of fun to play. I love Frost. I love minions. Minions are viable. Yes, they're not as strong as if you sacrificed your minions and just fully pumped your own damage, but they're fun to play with, and they can contribute in other ways besides their damage, like freezing enemies and giving you corpses for Corpse Explosion. Stay tuned for more Diablo 4 builds. We have another Druid build coming, along with another Barbarian soon, so you can look forward to those.